Hi Alex, how you doing? How's everything in London?
Going really well, actually, Guy. Yeah, it's strange times we're in, but it's feeling more positive in the last couple of weeks, and we're becoming more optimistic as restaurants are opening and bars are opening, and that's all good news for the wine trade. We're really, really excited where we're going at the moment.
It certainly is, and I think now is a great opportunity to sit down with yourself as the winemaker at
Mhm.
London Cru, go through some of your wines. But I think before we dive in, tell me a little,
Mm.
how does how did you come over to be in the English wine industry and particularly joining London Cru? It's quite a thing that.
It is. How long do you have, Guy? It- it- my path into wine was I suppose indirect. So I was a geologist out of uni first. I worked in traveling all around Asia and East Australia, making holes in the ground and working for an industry that's quite invasive, but also a big part of Australian culture and economic situation. So that was good out of uni. But after a few years, my wife and I, sort of took a view of sort of reselecting our careers or guiding ourselves a little more thoughtfully. So she stepped out of she was a lawyer, and she stepped into sort of public service, and I wasn't quite that altruistic. I went to my next love and passion, so was wine. So for years and years, all of our holidays and our family conversations and everything revolves around wine, but it wasn't really a career path that was really on the table at the time. I never really thought about it, to be honest, when I was 20. So after about, I don't know, 10 years or so, that sort of bug grew and grew. And I ended up quitting my job and started working in a little winery, or not so little, a winery in Bellarine Peninsula, so just near where my family are based. So my mum and dad live in Point Lonsdale, just sort of west Melbourne, west of Geelong, inland there. There's a couple of wineries, Bannockburn by far, Lethbridge Wine Estate. So I worked for those guys, and they were my introduction to the passion of winemaking with Ray Naddison and Marie. Really fortuitous. At the time, the assistant winemaker was a young guy called Alex Byrne, who opened up Noisy Ritual, which is Melbourne's first urban winery. So just through that experience, I had this crazy whirlwind experience with Ray. I would go there and I'd work in the vineyard, or I'd work in all the critical stages and through vintages and bottling, and whatever he needed me to do, I was there to do. I slept in a caravan on site. I was a bit of a gypsy on his property. And then I'd go back to my wife, who was based in Canberra. And then I'd come back to Ray and do some work in the caravan. And so it was kind of a crazy period, but really planted the seed of this exciting, passionate winemaking. It's not, it would change every year. There's no recipes. It's really just based on Ray's passion and Marie's passion and his adventure of winemaking sort of really alive. So working for him was fabulous. From that, I went back to uni. So I did my master's. It's called the Vinifera EuroMasters. So I was very lucky to get that from Australia. I studied in France for a year, studied in Italy for a year, working in wonderful wineries at the same time. So I worked in Barolo with GD Vajra, which was absolute amazing experience. I did a really long vintage with them, really living on premise with the family, and just had a really, that's the biggest winery I've worked at, but it's one of the most precise and let's say strict for that's probably a nice way of saying it, because they're very, very precise and they care so much about their products. So that was a fabulous one to work for. And then after that, I worked for Le Grappins in Beaune, which is again an iconic winery. Let's not say urban, but it is an urban winery. It's been there for a long time, but it's right in the heart of Beaune in Burgundy, working with fruit from Beaujolais, from the Rhone, and from obviously Burgundy, and absolutely incredible operation there. It's the most manual, hardworking crew you'll ever work with in your life, and a lot of sommeliers in London will attest. It's a great experience, but you will sleep for 100 hours after doing a week there. After that, I was lucky. I approached Charlie Holland, so from Gusbourne. That was my entrance into the UK. So my wife, after following me around was a tough job she had. For the 2 years I was studying, she was learning French and we called it the never-ending summer of Steph. So she really had the best of everything. She had no exams like I did or no chemistry lessons. She could just really soak up. But that had to come to an end, and where we ended up, we weren't ready to go back to Australia. We had visas here. Her grandfather and my family have English heritage, so we were able to come to the UK. So maybe a bit of convenience and options to stay around Europe. And then I worked for Charlie Holland and was really excited by the English wine industry. So I had tried wines from Night Timber. Two of the guys I worked with or studied with are from here. So one guy down in Kent doing really good wines, another guy was down in Canterbury. So I was tasting wines all the time through uni from England. As a surprise, I would sneak in a Night Timber, lineup of French champagne that we're all sort of trying to work out what vintage or, all those games that you play. So the quality I was already convinced of the quality. And then Gusbourne was my entry. So I just had such a good time with them. The challenge was we lived in London and it's hard to get to Appledore every day. I was doing the reverse commute for a while. So I really have a lot of empathy for people who do that long term, but it also costs a lot. The winemaker salary is not so good. It was like half my salary gone before I even walked out the door. So we ended up coming to London, living here, and I approached quite a few wineries here, but the facilities that London Cru have, the investment and the attitude was really fabulous. So I was just lucky that, it was sort of all lined up perfectly. I literally knocked on the door and said, "Hey, can I have a job? Do you need a winemaker?" And they said, "Actually, we do." And that's kind of how it worked. It was really fortuitous. It wasn't advertised. It was just, that's the way it is. So, yeah, that was a couple of years ago. So now we're 3 vintages in and loving it. More and more, I'm getting my head around England. And when I first turned up, the grapes were not familiar. So two of the grape varieties you'll try today, I had not tried 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago when we moved here.
Really? Okay.
So Pinot Noir Precoce it's not even really a household sort of familiar wine variety even in the UK, which it should be. I really think it should be. We should be very proud of it. But at the same time, globally, that's the biggest story. We haven't even scratched that education process. So Germany, yeah, of course they will know it, but outside of Germany, it wouldn't be that common or that familiar to people. So
that's
do you want to? Yeah. I can keep going. Yeah, sure. Yeah, look, you probably don't want to hear my life story too much more than that, do you?
No, it's all good.
So the first wine I'd love for you to try is Bacchus. So we always, and this is so. I'll take a breath while you're pouring the wine, and you can sort of have a smell and a taste. And I'll get back to the wine in a minute. But let me tell you the story of London Cru as best I know it.
Yeah.
London Cru opened in 2013. It was so Cliff Robeson, who I work for. I work for, this is Robeson Wine. Cliff and his daughter Talia Robeson, who is now running it. They, in 2013, thought it was a great idea to build a winery in London, which seems a bit crazy maybe from the outside, but they, I suppose through osmosis or through trips to California, had seen sort of the opportunities or the interest of the wineries that have done similar things from the US. Same sort of story as me, actually. Once you see it working, there's no reason why it shouldn't work. It's a fabulous model. It makes the concept of urban winery, to me, is it really allows, this is where everyone lives, and it makes wine accessible. It really is accessible. You don't have to travel. Nowadays, with drinking rules, it's hard to go visit a winery and you have to have a designated driver. So not everyone can have fun. For an event space, what's better than a winery? They're just a very cool urban, very sort of, with all the tanks and bottles around it, it makes for a nice environment for sort of a staff party and that. So it has its purpose. But the key for an urban winery is that there's not much different to this winery to a winery in Kent that I've worked in the past. The tanks are the same, the barrels are the same, the hoses and the floors are the same. Like everything's the same. The major point is the grapes do not come from Fulham. That's the key point. So we don't source from Fulham. We go a little further. So first one we're looking at is West Sussex. So I was there on Monday. It's an hour and 20 minutes to the door. If you don't hit Putney Bridge at a bad time these days, but it's really not that far. So we'll source. We find a grower. So, for example, the wine that we have now is Bacchus. The grapes for this vintage, so this is the, for 18, 19, we had 2 different vineyards blended. The new release, the 2020, which I'll get in your hands pretty soon,
sure,
will be a single vineyard. So it was the best vineyard that we've found.
Okay.
And we've decided rather than make more, we're going to make less, but more premium, let's say.
Higher quality, yeah.
We had one vineyard that every year was outstanding, and that's in Upperton. So that's the vineyard that I really like to shout about for our grapes because its story's kind of cool, and I'll touch on that a little bit. That vineyard is now part of a few vineyards, but it's for a sparkling producer. They have about 100 acres of grapes under vine, but they make traditional sparkling wine, so meaning they use Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier, and Pinot Noir. In their sort of growth phase, they picked up a bit of a vineyard that has 4 rows of Bacchus, and we get that because they don't need it. It doesn't work for what they do. And we're very, very lucky to have that because these guys are ultimate, like they're just very professional. They know exactly what they're doing. They've got the scale to be really precise and just perfect viticultural managers. I don't need to advise them at all. They are, the best example of perfect vineyard management in the UK that I've found. So we're very, very lucky to have this vineyard. So that's the core of our range. Every year, Bacchus is the largest produced wine we make. We make mostly still wines here. We make about 80% still and about 20% sparkling. So we're the flip side, exactly in the reverse of most wineries in the UK, very deliberately. This is the advantage of an urban winery. Sorry to keep crossing my wires and twisting around, but the advantage of an urban winery is that we don't have a vineyard. So let's touch on that. We can go to the different locations, West Sussex, Essex, Kent, down to Canterbury. We can source from them, depending on the region or the year, the frost problems, the rain. We can avoid areas that have trouble, and we can find areas that have wonderful fruit every year. So this flexibility gives us a bit more confidence to be able to make still wine. The challenge is if you have a single vineyard in one spot, you really are, and you have to make your wine from just that. Sparkling wine in the UK is definitely the choice because there's a lot of advantages for ripeness potential. You don't need to get that high, and it suits the climate really well. For us being urban, and we can go out to the vineyards and source what we need as we like. Still, we fight the climate in the UK. So back to the grapes that we use here, Bacchus and Pinot Noir Precoce, which will be the second one we try. There's a reason we use these grapes, and it's simple. They're very well suited to the UK's climate, the current climate. Every year we can make fabulous Bacchus, and we've proven that. Year in, year out, you can make great Bacchus. And it really is a grape that I've grown really fond of. There's styles of it that I don't like any wine. I can find a Chardonnay. I don't like it in this style, but I like a really crisp Chablis. People have a preference, and I think Bacchus, you have that range of potential as well.
Sure.
So the style we're making here is it's crisp, it's dry, it's really focusing on fruit, so gooseberry. You can get a little bit of tropical, so passion fruit, but really I love the zesty, grapefruity, let's say citrus vibe, much more than the floral, really over the top elderflower, which it can be. That's my preference, at least. And for me, it's one of the best food pairing wines we can produce because it is so aromatic and it really can hold itself against so many food options, but particularly seafood. And everyone in the office is sick of me saying this, or every tour group is sick of me saying this. I always recommend that you pair this with any dish you would squeeze lemon on or lime. So pad thai is a classic example. It is amazing with pad thai. The zesty, lemony, grapefruit vibe of Bacchus can really hold up. But the power of the aromatics is really powerful in Bacchus, and it can hold up against these food types. So we've had Bacchus listed all around London before COVID. So we're hoping that once everything opens up again, we can get back out there and get them in these fabulous restaurants, because I think that gives us a bit of credibility that, if Heston Blumenthal is pairing Bacchus with scallops, everyone should be. That's just that simple. It's obviously a good pairing if some of the best somms in London are recommending it with their food. There's something we should be really proud of in the UK. That's a local grape that, for me, there's no better example of Bacchus than what's coming out of the UK now. We can really be proud of that. All the other grapes that are available here. So I do love some Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs that are coming out, but the challenge is on a good year, they can be great. So 2018, fabulous. Warm year. We loved it. Everyone loved the long summer. But the challenge is on a cooler year, you're going to have a lot higher acidity than maybe the balance, that really, it's hard to, they can become a bit too austere. So particularly the reds for me can be really hard to ripen in a cold year. I think crisp, really lean Chardonnay, fine. I've had some really crazy zippy Chardonnays from the Jura that are astoundingly good. And I think we can make that style here on a cold year, but Pinot Noir can be a bit too aggressive on a cold year here. So that's sort of why we use Precoce instead of the Burgundian clones. Yeah.
Sure.
So
I think
we'll get to that.
With your Bacchus, what I've always found very interesting about this, and this seems to be whatever you do within the winemaking, it's much smoother than some of the other Bacchuses you come across, because not a lot, but some of the English white wines made from Bacchus, they can be a bit too austere, or they're a bit too sharp, and it's a very fine balancing act. Your Bacchus I haven't come across it yet in the previous vintages that I've had, has had that issue. It's much smoother, it's much more mellow, and therefore more enjoyable to drink. And I don't find myself wanting to pair it as much with a spicy dish or with something like fish and chips, and that's a lot fattier, to tame that down. And that's a very good thing, because whilst it's great finding food pairings and various other elements to pair wines with, it's great when you have a wine that you can just drink. And that's what this Bacchus does, which is the first thing that surprised me when I had it, as I say, because normally I'm thinking I'd want to have something with it, but this is nice, easy to drink. And it's the mouth, though. That's the main thing. There's a lot there. It does coat the tongue well. And there's a slight fullness to it. The body, the depth within it has been well achieved. It's not too thin.
So I spend a lot of time thinking about how to achieve that. So there's a lot of classic techniques that are done. So, for example, I'm leaning on a little bit of methods from Bordeaux, so classic white wine region, where you'll have Sauvignon Blanc, which is sort of typically stainless steel. So in the tanks behind us, fermented in tanks just like this. We leave it on the lees. So after fermentation, the yeast drop to the bottom, and we leave it on there for as long as possible. I'm tasting it constantly, and I think in 18, I would have racked it off in March. So you take it off at some point where the contribution starts to become not what you want. You kind of want to go as far as you can. And then, so that yeast is contributing texture, flavor, complexity, helps soften the acidity.
Yeah.
It's really, really important. So lees contact. But the other trick, and not trick, but the method that's used in Bordeaux is that they use Semillon in oak barrels a lot of the time, which is a grape that's suited to oak aging. And then that is blended with the Sauvignon Blanc. So we don't have Semillon, and we're making a pure Bacchus wine. So what I do is I essentially sacrifice some of the aromatic, intensity of Bacchus. So the amount that I put in the barrel, the oxygen kind of dulls it, let's say, but the texture you get in the wine and the flavors that come in from the oak, and you have an increased surface area for the yeast to be in contact with the wine. This really is an important component. So my winemaking ethos really for Bacchus is to build components that are thoughtfully done. So it's not just chuck it in a tank, chuck some yeast in, and that's your wine. That's not how I do it. I do use yeast. My master's thesis was on yeast selection, and I'm a bit of a yeast nerd. So I'm not in any way hands off with yeast selection. I am very hands off with chemicals and other products, but I think yeast selection is a very good tool, particularly when you're trying to make an aromatic, crisp white wine like this. It's a really good way to get a style that I think is interesting and distinctive. But what I do with that, it's not just chuck the packet of yeast in and that's your wine again. That's the assumption of a lot of people maybe. That's kind of a lazy way of doing it. What it is about building components. I'll have 4 or 5 different yeasts, each with a different component each. So the majority will be this, but I'll have 2 tanks with different yeast, maybe focusing on, not to get too deep, but one yeast will be producing thiols or releasing the aromatics that are similar to a Sauvignon Blanc. One yeast is more promoting terpenes, which are more akin to what is in a Riesling. And the potential of Bacchus to have this because of its history and its parentage is real. So just through years of doing it now, I'm getting a bit more confident with what these wines taste like individually, and then I piece them back together as a final blend. So this wine that you're tasting, I sent to you deliberately as an older one because everyone thinks, okay, the new release is out, and we sell out of Bacchus every year, gone in 1 year. But really, what I want to show is that after 2 years, this is a 2018 you're trying now. It is better now than it ever has been. It's really good now. It gets a mintiness. It gets a different aromatic profile. It becomes more complex. We have some from the 2014 vintage, which is astoundingly good. It really goes to that Riesling, TDN kind of chemical. It sounds strange, but trust me, people like this. It's like a chemical vibe with minty, like spearmint flavors, and it's not about just passion fruit and elderflower, which is what sometimes Bacchus gets dismissed for. So 2 years in bottle, I think now you'll find that this wine's really, really interesting.
There's a lot of development there. I completely agree. And as you say, with the reason it's like petrol, isn't it? That you can get the crispness. But thank you. I mean, I appreciate you sending me through this one, particularly with the slightly older vintage. I think, as I was commenting earlier, one of the main things that I've always enjoyed about your Bacchus is the smoothness, the mouthfeel. Yeah. And it's, again, because this is a slightly older vintage, not that it's that old, it has tamed down ever so slightly. And it doesn't feel like the wine is fighting within itself. It's calmed down, it's smoother. It's very easy to drink, really easy to drink, which is great. You want to knock it back.
On a hot day, spring, summer, that's why we release it typically quite early, because we know it just pairs so well with a day in the park. It's really good for that. But the aging potential is underrated. I think it really has a great potential. What it is with Bacchus that I think that we do, it's maybe a bit different, is we pick it with high acidity deliberately.
Okay.
I haven't de-acidified ever since being here. I've never had to do that because we're picking, again, this is highlights how good these growers are. We've had 3 very different vintages, 18, 19 and 20. So we've had a very warm year, a bit of a wet year, and then a pretty average good year. So last year was a good year from my perspective. It wasn't the perfect 2018, but it almost was. The fruit came in perfectly. We didn't need to chapitalize, so we didn't need to increase alcohol in the current vintage. We didn't need to de-acidify any of them. So this is so just to make the point, I suppose, we haven't taken acid out to make it easy to drink. It is the natural that the grape has. What's great about Bacchus, and I'll say the same thing with the Precoce for the UK, and why is it good for the UK? I mean, it's all about the amount of sunshine we have versus how much the grapevine needs to become ripe. And when I mean ripe is you're tasting the berries every day or every couple of weeks in the vineyard. There's a point where they start to become, my best analogy is sort of like if you're picking an apple or a peach or an apricot off a tree, everyone's done that. If you pick it too early, it doesn't taste very interesting. It tastes like a supermarket apple. It's almost bland. It's
underdeveloped, as it were. Yeah.
But if you pick it at the right time, it's a completely different experience. It has the flavors, the aromas are intense. And grapes are the same. It's a bit harder because sometimes the aromas are, we call bound, so you can't actually taste them in the vineyard. So you're looking for different things. We're looking at acid, we're looking at sugar. For Bacchus, you do get some of the flavors of Bacchus even in the berry. And then you have to just go with your gut a little bit. That's kind of the way that the UK works, I suppose. So in September, we would be picking Bacchus and the Pinot Noir Precoce. If I was using Pinot Noir Burgundian clones, you're picking probably a month later than that. So late October, even into November is common for if you're trying to make a still red or a still white from Chardonnay Burgundian clones. And that 1 month or even 6 weeks gap is a crucial period because that's when rains start to happen.
Of course.
That's when the damage to your grape quality can occur. So for me, I don't have to worry about that as much because we're picking the grapes that work for the climate now. On a perfect year, will I chase down some Burgundian Pinot? For sure, I'd love to. But for the core wines in our range that we can make good quality every year and build a reputation on, these are the early ripening varieties are perfect for our sort of fringe winemaking climate. That's my perspective. That's if you're making stills. Keep your Chardonnay in the ground, keep your Pinot in the ground. On a cold year, make sparkling. And on a warm year, you can make good stills. But it's hard to make stills every year from Chardonnay and Pinot without playing too much chemistry.
Yeah, and particularly with our climate and all the variables, as we know, in the last few years, it's fluctuated so much. Yeah. I think that's the perfect way to go on to the next one. Which one would you like to move to?